I'm so sorry. I live by two strategic choke points at Leesburg and on K Street. I met first Colonel Mosby and then I don't know who was fighting here. It's daunting. I have to turn around. I'll make it as brief as possible because I have about 5 hours of material to tell you about. So I'll try to boil it down in a acceptable format. Today we'll talk about, well, it'll be a case study of communist propaganda, but the background to it is anti-communist insurgency. The movie you're about to see is based on, the movie you're about to see is based on a book with the same title by Jerzy Andrzejewski. The story of the book is very simple. The head of the secret police, Jakub Berman, called in a formerly nationalist writer and said, "Redeem yourself, write a book. Here's a file from the secret police, and write a book." So according to the story, a righteous, decent, wonderful communist provincial governor was assassinated by a deluded, ill-informed and confused former Home Army fighter. Home Army was wartime anti-Nazi underground. After the war, elements of it continued the struggle. The book came out in 1947, serialized, and then it was published in 1948. By 1950, even though the book was welcomed by the communist authorities and the author received a great accolade for his work, by 1950, the book was not Stalinist enough. Even though you had various propaganda vignettes of evil landed nobility now dispossessed by the communists, who serve as bartenders and waitresses in a reactionary restaurant where the proprietor sleeps with a fiancée of a communist worker killed by the reactionary bandits, meaning the anti-communist resistance. That was not good enough by 1950. Following 1956, which was a huge break with many of the Stalinist practices, in particular open and mass terror, the communist government tapped Andrzej Wajda, a director, and said, well, make a movie based on the book, but make it now about more of a reconciliation. Let the insurgents be still deluded and wrong, and the communists pretty and nice, but make the insurgents more human, not beasts like, for the past 11 years or so. When I was a kid, I only watched the movie because of a couple of scenes. One scene in the bar, famous scene where the Home Army underground fighters remember their friends who had fallen in battle, and they light up moonshine glasses and slide them to one another, pronouncing the names of those who had been killed. That's one scene which really gives me goosebumps. The second scene is about interrogating captured insurgents by the secret police. And there is a scene where perhaps an 18-year-old kid who falsely in the movie and in the book is described as the son of the righteous communist provincial governor who gets assassinated. When he's interrogated by the secret police, an officer asks him, "So how old are you?" And the kid says, 100. So the secret police slaps him and says, "And now?" And the kid responds, 101. Because he had been through the war, he had been in the forest fighting the Nazis and then the communists, as all decent human beings should have been doing. So that's all as a kid that I could relate to. Everything else was repulsive to me. It was obvious communist propaganda, but in a very subtle way, very artistic way. That's why artists are so insidious, because they can penetrate your soul. I will not tell you, yes, if they want to do it to nefarious ends, I will not tell you more about the movie. You'll see it yourself. Instead, I'll tell you the true story. Stanisław Kosicki, the hero of the anti-hero of the movie. He was in the anti-Nazi underground during World War II with gray ranks. Those are Boy Scout underground troops. He was in the forest as a guerrilla fighting. In July 1945, his underground squad, which had returned from the forest and secreted itself in the city of Kielce, received an alarm call. Alarm, alarm, there is a robbery. Since the communists didn't have too many followers, and since they were incapable of setting up any form of a government, and the communist leader Władysław Gomułka admitted in May 1945, without, I quote, without the Soviet troops, we'd be gone in a day. Since they didn't have a government, the Home Army continued fulfilling various functions, aside from freeing prisoners bound for the Gulag, aside from assassinating top secret policemen and bumping off Red Army. The Home Army also performed police functions. So this particular alarm, when the squad was called to assist, occurred because there was a robbery of a house, of a private residence. So a kid, a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, ran to a neighbor, and the kid knew that the neighbor was with the underground. The alarm went out to help out the kid's parents, who were being robbed by unknown perpetrators. So the squad hurried to the rescue, and this kid, this particular soldier, this is his picture at that time, was shot at, and he returned fire and killed one of the robbers. The rest fled. Lo and behold, it was the provincial governor, communist provincial governor. His name was Jan Foremiak. Not only that, he had been with the NKVD, Soviet secret police. He had been parachuted into Poland, was a part of the tiny communist underground. And because he was then appointed as provincial governor, he decided to get himself a suit, because he didn't have one. And since he was used to the communist ways, he went and attempted to rob one. This is not what the movie is all about. You will see what the movie was all about, but that is the background story to the movie. I repeat, a secret police top supervisor, Jakub Berman, provided a file of this to a very gifted writer who lied, and then the lie was perpetrated by Wajda. Huh? I'm sorry?
Catholic writer.
Oh, nationalist writer, actually. Oh, okay. This is how the communists bought people. That's how they co-opted them. That's how they made people prostitute themselves. And that is how they lied to everybody else. Okay. So that is the story. By the way, this kid, Stanisław Kosicki, survived. He went into hiding. The communists caught him, I think. Oh, he was arrested and he was in jail. And then Szary, he died as a general, but at that time he was a captain, attacked the jail and freed the entire prison. This fellow, this particular insurgent officer, later spent time in jail with my father. So I knew about this. I didn't know exactly about Stanisław Kosicki, but I knew about the jailbreak. Stanisław Kosciuszko changed his name, and he was not captured by the communists until 1957, when he went to jail. And then, you know, he was in trouble, but not as much as he would have been back in 46, 47, etc. He survived. He lived long enough to see the fall of communism. Then he was interviewed by a journalist who thought it was impossible. Then the journalist hit the archives, as journalists usually don't, but this one did. And he said, "Oh my goodness, this is all a lie. And what you will see is all a lie." A lie that was supposed to do what Stalin liked to say about himself and his people, especially poets, artists, and writers. They are engineers of human souls. Then the better the art appears, the more insidious the intention. And I want you to enjoy the movie, but before you enjoy the movie, I'll flip through a couple of pictures so you could appreciate armed anti-communism. Here it is. The history of anti-communism starts with pre-revolutionary times, but it really explodes during the Bolshevik Revolution and its aftermath. This is a white poster, white meaning white Russians, monarchists. Next to it is General Bułak Balachowicz. General Bułak Balachowicz was a great raider and anti-communist leader of the whites, and he focused in particular on Belarus. So right now, Belarusian opposition to Lukashenko, or parts of the opposition, deify him. He's their great hero. When the Soviets, when the Nazis attacked East in 1941, everywhere from Tallinn to Odessa, there broke out an anti-communist uprising. There was a general uprising and general slaughter. Unfortunately, most of the top Soviets managed to flee, so in many cases those insurrectionary activities turned against Jews, and they started killing Jews as alleged Soviet collaborators. Okay. Okay, here you have Chetniks in Serbia. Chetniks and others fought against the communists in Yugoslavia. There were several kinds of Chetniks. The ones we see depicted are followers of Colonel Draža Mihailović, who was a pro-Western royal guerrilla of the Serbs. Not to be confused with Serb Chetniks who collaborated with the Nazis. They all dressed the same. Sometimes they even had the same insignia, so if you didn't know who you were dealing with, that's what it was. Here is, on the other side of the Intermarium, Estonia. Oops. Jeez. Unfortunately, let me just it skipped to the end. Jeez. Okay, here's Estonia. The last insurgent in Estonia, anti-communist insurgent, was killed by the KGB in the field in 1978. They were hardcore people. He was in the forest since 44. Yes. We just refused to surrender. He lived off the land, and the locals who shared food with him at great peril. Whoever helped was shipped to the Gulag or shot. So, as you know, guerrillas have to have local support, otherwise they don't survive. By the way, this was a KGB picture of an attempted arrest, which didn't work out. He fought. Here are some faces of Polish armed anti-communism from 1919 and so. This is a commanding officer of my great-grandmother's brother, who was a sergeant, cavalry sergeant in the 1st Krychowiecki Lancers Regiment. Here is, well, friends of my family in the self-defense of Wilnoland. That's Colonel Jerzy Dąbrowski's outfit, Upaszka. He was possibly the ugliest officer in the Polish army. Didn't talk much, but you didn't want to be on the other side of him. Here is Major Jaworski's guerrillas in what is now Ukraine. There's the Polish-Soviet War, the only time in history that the Red Army was defeated in the field. Some of the co-architects of the victory. This is Captain Cooper and Major Fauntleroy, Americans from U.S. Army Air Corps. They volunteered to come to Poland after World War II. They were hanging out in Paris, and they launched the most successful Polish air squadron. They were co-founders of the Polish Air Force. You all should know about these guys. Our Polish chair bears their son. This is what we have. This is Kosciuszko's scythesman four-cornered hat. Now, all of you know who Cooper is, right? He produced King Kong. And he said in his memoirs, a beast from the east attempting to seduce the innocent maiden of the west, and the gallant pilots ride to the rescue. It's the Polish Bolshevik War, for goodness sake. Miriam Cooper, his great-grandfather, had been an adjutant to General Casimir Pulaski, who founded U.S. cavalry during the War for Independence, who died at Savannah, I think, in 1778. At Brandywine, Casimir Pulaski, seeing that the British were about to kill George Washington, did an eminently Polish thing and charged head-on against the Brits, and they balked, which was very unusual. And as you know, infantry with bayonets is usually well prepared to meet a cavalry charge, but this time they balked, and George Washington was able to survive the Battle of Brandywine. Anyway, so Cooper thought he owed the Poles, because they came to America, Pulaski and Kosciuszko and others, not seeking commission or anything, but to fight for freedom. So he figured, they were crazy, I'm crazy, I happen to be in Europe, there I'll go and I'll kill some Bolsheviks. And we'll all have fun. And that's exactly what he did. In 1939, 1941, as you know, the Nazis and communists colluded as friends, and they jointly attacked Poland. That's how World War II started. Many Polish units fought a two-cornered war, interchangeably against the Nazis and the communists. One of the most famous one is this Olympian, Olympic champion. He was a rider, Major Henryk Dobrzański-Hubal. His squadron stayed in the field from September 1939 until April 1940, when it was destroyed by the Nazis. But the squadron started out fighting the Soviets. When the Soviets returned, the Poles who had been fighting the Nazis immediately switched into the anti-communist mode, active anti-communist mode, and they began resisting. This is the map of the anti-communist uprising in Poland as it became after 1944, as a Soviet colony. Please note the intensity, and if I showed you a map of voting patterns in Poland, all of these areas vote staunchly conservative until this very day. That used to be Germany. And these areas with atomized populations tend to vote left and liberal. See? See? The new president was elected mostly in the south and the east. Poland wasn't the only country, of course. There was anti-communist resistance everywhere. Here is Hungary. The only problem is that Hungary was an Axis country, and most people who were in the anti-communist resistance had been pro-Nazi. Not so in Poland. In Poland there is no inferiority complex. The Poles are equal opportunity haters. They hated Stalin and Hitler, just like anybody decent should have. Here's communist propaganda, the giant and the expectorated dwarf of reaction, which is, and it says Home Army on the dwarf, and this is a communist soldier. Souvenir photos by the secret police. They had just shot 2 underground soldiers. You see his pants are ripped, the guy who's holding them. He was later executed. The pants are ripped because when they ran out of ammunition and they were still fighting, the communists sent in dogs to get him. Another souvenir picture. This is a Pushchik unit, 1949. And you guys thought the war ended in May 1945 in Europe. There's another, 1953. They're all secret police archives, Słowik. And here's a friend of my grandmother and my grandfather. They were in the underground together. Major Łupaszko, executed in 1949. I'll stop here. There are very many stories. Each picture has a story I could tell you for 5 hours or so. This one is very significant. She was a combat medic of Major Łupaszko, of the previous guy, of this guy. She was a combat medic with his unit. Her father was shipped in the Gulag and he died. Her mother was executed by the Germans when she was 14. So she was sworn in her mother's stead into the underground. She remained outside of the unit. When she was 14, she would deliver bandages and supplies and carried messages from time to time. But generally speaking, she was in loco. She was at home and was not involved in fighting. In July 1945, her whereabouts became known to the communist secret police. There was a general bust. Her boss, she was working as a typist at a forester's house. Her boss was arrested. He was with the underground too. She was arrested and a bunch of other people. As they were being escorted to be shipped off to the Gulag, Major Łupaszko's units attacked, wiped out the communists, freed the prisoners, and she had no place to go. So she became a combat medic. She made a mistake. During one of the firefights in, I think, May 1946, Danka Siedzikówna patched up a wounded communist policeman. 2 months later, she was in Gdańsk, in Sopot more precisely, on the Baltic Sea coast, and she was recognized and arrested. The trial took 3 days. She refused. She didn't break down under interrogation. She was tortured horribly. She was 17. Her last letter from jail to her grandmother was, "Please tell my grandmother that I did the decent thing," which means she didn't break down. And then she was executed. She was killed before she turned 18. She also refused to ask for clemency. She was hardcore. And there are more people who were killed by the communists. Each one has a story that included kids. This, by the way, this one on the right-hand side spent 25 years in jail, communist jail, after he was captured. There are priests who were underground chaplains. Oh, here's a friend of my family. He was dropped from England as a commando. and fought the Nazis, then he fought the communists, and was eventually executed by the communists in 1949. This guy was arrested in 1959. This is a picture from his arrest. You have some other guys, even mountaineers in southern Poland, hardcore. This is Captain Ogień. This guy, Felix Selmanowicz, was also in the same underground outfit as my grandparents. He's a Polish Tatar, Selim Selmanowicz. Yes, and he was killed by the communists together. He was executed together with that girl, Inka. They were caught together. Zygmunt Błażejewicz is still alive in Arizona. He freed the convoy where the girl was in. And here's my step-aunt Dzidzian, well, that's actually her husband, who was a commando. He brought out his guerrilla brigade. He was the chief of staff. And they hooked up with General Patton, 1,500 young men and women. They hooked up with General Patton, and General Patton, of course, told the Soviets off. He wouldn't turn the Polish guerrillas over to the communists. And here's another friend of mine, another commando. I grew up with him, his stories. He passed away in not so long ago, so he lived to see the fall of communism. He was very hardcore, Marian Gołębieski, a great fighter. And here is the fellow, when I volunteered for Afghanistan, he was supposed to be my commanding officer. Rafał Ganganowicz was 10 years old when the Germans killed his mother in Warsaw, bombing Warsaw in 1939. Then his father took him to Warsaw Uprising in 1944. His father was killed, and the kid stayed underground. When he was 14, he survived the uprising against the Germans. Later, he set up his own underground group, and they would write anti-communist graffiti. The group consisted mostly of war orphans. It was an underground anti-communist group. But the secret police in the ruins of Warsaw decided the best thing to put paid to tagging was to shoot at those kids. Well, those kids were war orphans, so they had weapons. They started shooting back. That went on until 1950, when the secret police showed up on his doorsteps. He was warned, retrieved his 2 Colt revolvers, got under a train, lay down on a brake of a train, and traveled west. He made it to Berlin. Then he reported to the Americans, turned in his weapons. Then he was sent to Bavaria, where he attended a cadet officer's school of the Polish army in exile under General Anders, and at the same time he was trained as a commando by the Americans. His task was to be the first wave in case General Eisenhower's electoral promise, liberation, rollback and liberation, would come true. It didn't, so after 1956 the outfit was dissolved. Rafał became a French teacher. He loved literature, so when he was training to be a commando, that was the degree he got, in addition to his military skills. In 1960 or so, Africa went up in flames, Congo. So he went to Joseph Chombe's embassy in Belgium. Moses Chombe was pro-Western of all the forces fighting there. And he said, well, I'd like to help you against the communists. I'd like to help you against the communists. And they said, sure, Poles are not colonialists, so you're very welcome. And he fought in the Congo. He almost got Che Guevara. He didn't know that. I didn't know that. We found out from communist archives after 1990. Disclosed. Che fled to Tanzania because Rafał wiped out his outfit. Then he fought for the king of Saudi Arabia, and his last caper was the head of the Foreign Legion to fight in Afghanistan, which didn't work out. At any rate, well, there are other people. who were tortured by the secret police and didn't give up. That one, actually, Jaga is very, this is a very sad case. She was pregnant. The secret police kidnapped her because she was the wife of Ojciec Jan, Franciszek Przysiężniak, Major Ojciec Jan, one of significant, regionally significant insurgent leaders. The secret police kidnapped her and then let her out of the car, and a secret policeman named Suproniuk shot her in the head, killed her. It wouldn't be anything worth mentioning because this was a daily occurrence in Poland in the early stages of communism. But after 1989, when with Bill Clinton's help and State Department's help, Poland elected post-communist Kwaśniewski to be president. The president decided to give a high medal decoration to that particular secret policeman, so we decided to remind everybody what his background was. Okay, here's my grandmother. She was arrested by the Gestapo in November 43, held until 44, never broke down. She was arrested by the NKVD in May 45, released in August 45. I have her interrogation records, didn't give him anything. And then she was arrested by Polish Communist Secret Police. Same story. Except she was unwell and she brought me up, so it must have rubbed off. Anyway, here is Ruta Czaplińska. I helped out when she accused a secret police officer of torturing her. The secret policeman would stand on her chest, others would hold her hands, and they used a lead-chipped whip to beat her on the crotch so she would talk. Oh yes, when anybody wants to say anything about how Americans torture terrorists, I would like them to read a paper I wrote about communist secret police torture techniques. Have you heard of the cruel American way of dealing with terrorists called walling? That's when you put someone against the wall and yell at him. There are some more people. There were insurgents. And here's what I found in my county that I studied for my dissertation. This guy was caught in 1961 in a bunker. So one of the last insurgents. Many of them committed suicide rather than surrender. This one, when he broke through a secret police dragnet, there was just him and his son and 1,200 troops, secret police troops. So when he broke through the dragnet, his son was wounded. He killed his son and himself. Do you know why? Well, because the secret police tended to catch people, torture them, and usually most people, 95% or maybe 98%, based on my studies, would reveal the names of whoever had helped them. So, if an insurgent was caught, it could lead to the arrest of about 400 human beings. That means your kids would be taken away from you and put in a communist orphanage to be indoctrinated. You'd be in jail, your house would be leveled. And you'd lose all your property for feeding insurgents. That's why suicides were not that uncommon. And this is what many of them wore on their uniform. A cross and Our Lady. And here are executioners. Wolinska ended up in Oxford. Oh yeah. Stefan Michnik ended up in Sweden. His brother runs Poland's largest left-wing liberal daily called Gazeta Wyborcza. Here is another guy, Stanisław Zarakowski. They all live well. Huge pensions, huge houses, everything is honky-dory. Adam Humer, that's the dude who was beating Ruta Czaplińska on her crotch. That's the one. He's the only one we really got. Meaning we found documents. He also murdered while torturing my friend's uncle, who was an underground newspaper editor. So, Adam Hummer is still around. Anyway. But things have gotten better. There are reenactors. Took this picture of a dude dressed in an NKVD uniform. They always stage battles and do anti-Nazi and anti-communist stuff. There are movies, songs. We won't go into it. I just want you to know the background. Songs, more songs. And we've been able to retrieve this from the secret police archives. This is another badge, insurgent badge. Maybe I'll play one for you. So I have 1 more minute. I have to run back to class. The same way I came, 60 miles. To class, because I have class at 2. Soccer fans. I don't think it'll work. See? Soccer hooligans unfurl banners. It says, apologize for your brother and for your father and son. This is to the editor of Poland's largest leftist newspaper. Those are messages that soccer hooligans send. So the memory is back. And if it weren't for, well, actually, Ronald Reagan, the Pope Margaret Thatcher, and basically America fighting the Cold War and even caring, none of this would have come out. It would have been just within my family. And then only some. None of this would have gotten out. We wouldn't have known the origins of the movie you're going to see. The dinosaurs are always invited to marches by the kids. Always, and honored. Always. Just like here, we honor the vets. November 11th, Memorial Day too. At any rate, without freedom, none of this would have come out. We wouldn't have known that the head of the secret police made a very talented nationalist Catholic author write a book. Of course, the guy didn't have to be a swine and he could have said no, but then he would not have been given a nice paycheck. He would have been given a shovel and sent to the Gulag. So those are the choices. A very gifted director that Wajda is, and you will see in 1 second a movie, would not have made this propaganda movie. But you see, that's all there was, and that's all that was permitted, because there was no freedom. Once there's freedom, all of this comes out. The truth will always out. Thank you very much.